So welcome to CannaGather, the future of social equity. Today's date is February 18th. So it is Black History Month, and it is right in the midst of the lead up to the governor's budget. So it is a very, very important time on multiple fronts. Very excited to have a truly unique and incredible speaker, Kareem Webb from Fourth Movement. Let's give a big round of applause for him. And as many of you know, we were due to have Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer speak. If you're disappointed, well, imagine how I feel. What we were going to talk about was the future of federal legalization. And I got some comments today that, this is a different topic. And yeah, it sort of is, but when you're talking about federal legalization, social equity is a very, very, very big part of what that is. And some of you are interested in some of the state level legalization conversations more so than the federal. And that's even more important when you're sort of looking at what the levers are for legalization and the frameworks around that. So social equity is very much part of the conversation, which is why we were going to have Senator Schumer and Kareem speak, because it's really the same subject. It's just a different title. And obviously, the social equity is a subset of legalization, but it's a very large part of that for context. Quick show of hands. Who's first time at CannaGather? Nice. Round of applause for all of you. Welcome. You're like, I have no idea what I'm getting into, but let's give it a shot because it has the word Canada. I know, Dana. I know. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Dana. I didn't forget, Dana. Who's been to CannaGather once or twice before? Nice. Well, thank you all. Dana doesn't need to raise his hand. He's been to about 60 of them at this point. Him giving me this piece of paper means he wants a shout out, and we'll get to that in a second. So quick question. This is a new slide. Big change. Who's here last time? Who's here last? Wow, that is awesome. Thank you all for coming back. Does anyone have a particularly interesting story? I mean, I know we have Oren, our speaker from last year with the busted bust, according to High Times. Does anyone have a particularly good story that they want to share? And show of hands, who's an entrepreneur? Who's an entrepreneur in the space? Or looking to break into the space? That's what I like to see. Thank you all for that. And who's an investor? And don't be shy, because normally you are. Nice, good turnout from the investors. So if you're looking for capital, definitely hit those people up. And if you're looking to fund entrepreneurs, it's a little dark, but look for those people right after. But in the meantime, this is sort of the not statistically accurate breakdown of what we see in terms of who's coming to CannaGather, and that's a question that we get asked quite a bit. Who's in the audience? So it's mostly entrepreneurs. It's secondarily investors, and then we have service providers, accountants, lawyers, real estate professionals, and then we have a mix of healthcare professionals, some activists. We have some media in the house tonight. Thank you for your coverage of this important issue at this important time. And let's take a minute or two, turn to the person next to you, and if you know them, turn to the other person next to you, and talk to them and learn what brings them to CannaGather. So if you weren't here last month, one of our speakers was Oren Levy from Green Angel CBD. He was, his brother was arrested for, what was that, 100 pounds? 106 pounds of weed. And by weed, I mean hemp that the NYPD thought was weed, but it wasn't. They arguably also knew that it was not weed. And that's the drama that you could either talk to Oren over there and learn more about, or all of our events are recorded by Dave. Thanks, Dave. And then if you go to CannaGather.com, you can check them out for free. That one is January 2020. And obviously we had Jamie Pearson from Bang, CEO of public traded company. Exactly. There's a woo. Multiple rounds of applause. Yeah, let's give a full round of applause for Jamie and for Oren. CEO of Bang. Got some great chocolates if you're there. Some excellent chocolate. And you can hear more about her story and what's going on in the capital markets, both in California and around the country, and what it's like to be a female CEO, publicly traded CEO in the cannabis industry. So be sure to check that out. That was last month. I want to give a couple quick shout outs. As you know, you can get a host committee 4-pack, VIP 4-pack. So Tommy DeMisa, Bobby Black, Bradley Valachi. Round of applause for all of you. You get, if you didn't get it, you get olive oil courtesy of Jenny from Baked at Home. I personally don't have the olive oil on me, but Jenny is probably here somewhere, and you are owed olive oil, so make sure to get it. It's delicious. And then you also get first come, first serve access to, there's a conference tomorrow and the day after, the NCIA Northeast Cannabis Business Conference in Boston, and they're giving us 5 free full expo passes, full passes, conference passes. So if you're interested and you're VIP, you get first dibs. And then we also have 20 conference passes, free conference expo passes, that is, for anyone else who's in this audience. So if you're interested in a free pass, email me, we'll give it to the first 20, and we might throw in a couple extra conference passes beyond just the expo. I will be there. I am getting on the train with Lisa at, I think, 6:55 to go to Boston. It'll be a great conference. I was there last year. Yes, it's cold, but it was worth it. And obviously, we love our friends over at the National Cannabis Industry Association and all the work that they do federally in creating some great events. I want to also give a shout out to our VIPs in the audience, Sanford Rubenstein, working with Oren. Round of applause. Longtime civil rights lawyer and just general badass lawyer. And Marty Baller of ASAP Mob. Thank you for coming through. Round of applause for both of you guys. For anyone who knows me, you know that I couldn't do this myself. So want to give a big round of applause for everyone on the CannaGather team for making this happen. Thank you all so much. Definitely couldn't do this without you. That's everyone you saw. I think Natalia is in Vegas or en route to Vegas, but everyone else should be here. So thank you all so much. Oh, Justin's somewhere in Asia. He does the leaflet. But everyone else is here. Thank you so much for everything. I think tonight's coming together pretty well, right? We haven't even started. We haven't even had the grace of Kareem, but so far so good. We got one slow clap, so I'll take it. Thank you all to the team. So we don't really have an after party, so I probably shouldn't say it. Kube was a little overwhelmed by us last time. We had way more people than they expected, so if you're interested in swinging by Kube, if it's not too packed, then show them some love. They'll have happy hour prices, no free food, and then make sure you get your early bird tickets for next month. I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end, but that'll be March 16th. And $5 discount if you grab the early bird ticket. Let's go through our sponsors. We got Fourth Movement. We'll hear from Kareem at length a little bit later, but just a round of applause once again. Thank you so much. Cole Shots. I know we have a couple of the Cole Shotsers are up in Boston, but maybe Mark is going to come up, or maybe I'll do it. Full service law firm. A lot of experience in the real estate, saw the opportunity and the importance on the cannabis side, given the footprint. Strong, the headquarters is in New Jersey, but they operate nationally. So that we're going to bring the dog up. Good to see you.
Yes, that's our newest equity partner right there. Brilliant little animal. Anyway, this crowd's growing every time we've been here of late, so this is going well. The one thing I just want to talk about, because I focused on it over the weekend. I was just doing some Google searches, and there's Trump having announced that, notwithstanding the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer amendment in the budget that's been signed, which goes through September 2020, and he's done this before. He says, "I reserve the right to ignore that. So if he decides to instruct the Justice Department to go after a particular medical or recreational licensee in a state where they've kept their hands off, he's saying that provision of the statute, which says you can't use any funds that have been authorized by Congress to interfere with legal state cannabis companies. So it just underscores how tenuous this industry can be and how important it is that you support the right kind of candidates and hopefully vote and put the right folks in office who will support this industry without this kind of waffling, which just leads to all sorts of uncertainty and makes it very difficult to operate. Anyway, thank you.
Commerce CPA, let's call it Vic, to introduce himself. Vic and I a round of applause, why not? Vic is a first-time sponsor over here at CannaGather. Got me to wake up for a 7 a.m. meeting, which is literally the first time that's ever happened, and maybe the last, because I didn't tell you, but I fell asleep for like 3 hours right after that. But yeah.
I don't blame you. That was really early. Thank you, everybody. My name is Vic, owner and founder of Commerce CPA. We're a team of highly qualified accountants and tax professionals. We, in the cannabis space, we're specializing in the tax law 280E and helping structure tax strategies to make the tax more efficient for cannabis and related companies. Also, we're helping out on audits and accounting and payroll and sales tax. We have experience in different industries as well. A lot of it's translatable. We were actually featured in Forbes just last year as one of the top accounting providers in the blockchain and crypto space. So hopefully that goes to show that we do value our clients and high quality deliverables. So hope to see you guys at the after party or next month.
Cool. Thank you, sir. So I sort of came up with this a little bit last time, but I'll give it another shot by sticking with it. This guy is as likely to lead your case against the Saudi Arabian government as he is to lead your Burning Man camp. Let's introduce the one and only Gerry Goldman from Anderson Kill. And I say that he could because he does both of those things. So for some background context.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. Okay. Josh, first comment, the long hair does look good.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. I run the cannabis practice at Anderson Kill. We're a law firm. A lot of law firms, a lot of good law firms. There's a need for a lot of good lawyers in this space. I'm really glad about the topic today, social equity, because people talk about this as a new business. This isn't a new business. People have been dealing weed for decades. People have been getting arrested for decades. Whenever we do with legalization, we have to recognize that people risk their life and liberty over it, and they need to be taken care of. The second thing that we have to remember, when we're talking about a business, this is a regular business, and we have to evaluate people, evaluate business ideas, and help them just like any other business. And thanks, Josh. You're doing a great thing with this program.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thank you. It's definitely a group effort in terms of both the team and then also all of you. If it was just me hanging out, then probably wouldn't be too interesting. Many people can attest to that. But with all of you, everyone brings a different flavor of insight, knowledge, experience, passion, and it's been a fun ride, fun 6 years. Couple quick key pieces of news. It seems like there might be some early traction in the NFL collective bargaining agreement. I don't know is Marvin here? Marvin Washington was sort of 50-50 on tonight, but he's both somewhat excited about some of the traction that they're seeing with making some of the penalties for players less severe. As we heard from Jonathan Casillas when he spoke last year, they're both already consuming cannabis and inundated with pills, and it's really an untenable situation. It was actually kind of scary listening to him talk, and basically like they didn't feel anything until Tuesday, at which point they felt like they got hit by a truck, and then it was sort of in that cycle again. Whereas we've seen, and the U.S. government has a patent on cannabinoids as a neuroprotectant, and so hopefully that can help them offset some of the adverse neurodegenerative impacts that have befallen people like Junior Seau, et cetera. So hopefully we'll see additional traction on the collective bargaining agreement and the NFL. New Mexico failed to pass legalization. Kevin Sabet from SAM sort of claimed victory and claimed that it was him. I don't know if it was, but it's just sort of a reminder that we do have people out there that are looking to actively spread disinformation and prey on fears to try to make sure that the status quo is perpetuated. And so if we're going to hopefully see legalization in New York State, we need to do the work, because there are people who are working against us and working against the truth to make sure that it doesn't happen. So, speaking of which, was up in Albany for Lobby Day last week. It's still a little early, I'd say. So right now, this week, legislature is on recess. They'll reconvene starting next week. And I think that's when you'll start to see some of the what are called the three-ways. Yes, they're literally called three-ways between the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly, and the representatives from each of those. And that's sort of where they start to negotiate their respective bills and their positions on those bills. So obviously the governor has the CRTA 2.0. That's the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we can chat. But basically that's sort of what the governor has come out with. There's probably going to be a couple iterations thereon, and then it'll be interesting to see what happens from the Senate and the Assembly in terms of, are they going to bring back MRTA, which was the bill from last year? Is there going to be a C print, which we were all waiting for? I don't know. I really have no idea. So it's going to be interesting. Is it going to happen? I also don't know. Like, is it going to pass? I still don't know. But what I do know is I think it should pass, and I would imagine that many of the people in this room also want it to pass. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to try to make it, lend a hand. Not to say that I would have any significant impact, but try my best. So continuing to have conversations with your legislators, reach out to your lawmakers, especially if they're in Long Island, and also hit up the governor's office and remind him we need to have legalization, and then we also need to have equity as part of that conversation. We need those two things. And so we're going to have a CannaGather in Albany next Wednesday. We already have Representative Gottfried, who has been doing cannabis legalization for like 40 years at this point, like 27 years. We just confirmed Representative Mosley, who's leading the BPHA caucus marijuana task force to speak. So we're basically hitting up every single office. Thank you, Lisa and Steve, for going up to Albany to do that. And if you guys are able to come next Wednesday night from 7 to 9, we will have CannaGather, but with a bunch of legislators. So it should be kind of interesting, and hopefully, as I said, we can keep the drumbeat going for a dual message of legalization and equity. And actually, I guess one important note is that the Daily News actually came out with a really strong editorial this morning, sort of echoing that sentiment. So thank you to them for that. Wilson Elser, as Gerry was saying, law firms got a lot of amazing service providers who support CannaGather. Wilson Elser is bi-coastal. They're nationwide, but they have a really strong practice in California and in New York. Been working with them on a project and been going really well so far. So thank you to the Wilson Elser team for that. So if you're interested in legal services, you have 3 amazing firms to choose from. And on the accounting side, you heard from Vic. And MGO is also helping out on the accounting side. And then you have LO, which does a variety of professional services, advisory services. They have branding. They have Evan starting a fund. There's all sorts of stuff going on with MGO and LO. So as I said, accounting and professional services. Grassi, Robert Bernstein, again, continuing with the theme, we have you hooked up on the legal side, and then again with Grossi and Robert Bernstein on the accounting side as well, along with MGO and Vic from Commerce CPA. What was that?
First of all, I wanted to say what a pleasure it is, and it's really an honor to be able to work with Josh and CannaGather. So I think this is, it's a very important topic, legalization of adult use marijuana in New York, New Jersey, and nationwide. But I think if we could really focus in on New York and New Jersey and keep the momentum going and bring in that social equity aspect to the cannabis legalization, it'll be a great thing for everybody. So I wanted to thank you again. So I'm Robert Bernstein, partner at Grossi. We're a CPA firm, and we have a cannabis specialty.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Robert. And last but not least, we have MWE, another great accounting firm who's been supporting us, so thank you so much for that, Max and the rest of the team. Again, Boston, tomorrow, I will be there, many people will be there, and they'll also be there the day after. Yes, it's a little colder, but it'll be awesome. So NCIA, Northeast Cannabis Business Conference. The CSE, I don't know if Barrington is here, but thank you so much for all of your support. Canadian Securities Exchange. Splash, that's where you get the tickets from. Tress Capital, both venture capital and incubatory advice. If you're looking to start a company, get in touch with David from Tress Capital. Urban Verde Group, growers and cultivators on the CBD side, on the THC side, in a couple different states. Thank you for your support. And Bimble, you probably had one of their drinks, CBD beverages. And as I said last time, if anyone is here from the DOH MH or from the DOH and wants to give me a fine for us having CBD ingestibles, I'm happy to pay the fine. And hopefully this changes soon. So thank you all so much. Round of applause. As you know, you can check out some of the stuff that's going on with CannaGather around the country. We're in, I believe, 8 cities right now. And there's one going on in Boston as we speak. And then, as I said, next Wednesday we'll be up in Albany trying to move the needle as much as we can. And then we'll be back. On the 16th. Well, let's talk about that for a second. So if you go to CannaGather.com, by the way, and go to the calendar, you'll just see what we're up to across the country. And then, as I said, this is what we're up to in Albany. If you're interested in getting involved, helping spread the word, sponsoring, know anyone else that wants to sponsor, if you know a celebrity, if you know Spike Lee in particular. I was thinking about changing the name to like Do the Right Thing. And so I thought it'd be cool if he like spoke. I don't know. Or someone who is a real mainstream, large-scale celebrity who can lend credence to that this is a movement that's bigger than a couple people that the governor can just sort of say, I don't really care about that, and just do whatever he wants, because in many ways he can, and that's what we're fighting against. We all need to, as Senator Savino said when she came here, she saw so many people who are so passionate and so vested in this, invested in this industry and this movement, but we don't go up to Albany, and so no one hears from us. Like, quick show of hands, and this is not like a shame thing, because like if you asked me last January, I would have been like, someone else could do it, normal DPA, someone else can do it. Who's been to Albany to talk about cannabis? It's a decent number, but if 200 people showed up to the second floor, that would be a statement. So it's really, and I think that being cynical, jaded New Yorkers, we're like, no one's going to give a shit, right? No one's going to care. But actually, they kind of do, especially if we show up and we show up in a coordinated way. So that's what we're doing on the 26th. And Dana is going to get mad at me if I don't plug his event. As I said last time, Dana used to just sort of come up on stage and grab the mic, and he doesn't do that anymore, so we appreciate that. But as sort of one of the founders of the cannabis legalization movement, we got to pay him some respect. So He's doing a decrim forum, 100 years of cannabis prohibition. What? A block from here at the so you're 100. How long have you been doing this? 100 years? Only 50. I'm just kidding. Since 1967. So 52 years, 53 years, 52 and a half years, whatever that may be. So if you're interested, Dana's up front. He's the guy with the cool mustache. Oren's speaking. Joe Bondi is speaking. Yes, he's more than just a famous lawyer on TV. He's also a proud member of our community. Saturday from 2 to 8. Thank you, Dana. So find Dana. And then also come to Albany with us. So on March 16th, we'll be talking about the sort of investment side of things. Fabrice has been a friend and a mentor for about a decade now as I've been on the tech side. And he's invested in a couple companies on the cannabis side. He's sort of an economist and a marketplace expert. He was touted by Forbes as the #1 angel investor in the world. And he'll be our speaker on March 16th. And we have a new venue. Can never really read that, but I guess it's okay. I want to give a shout out to Brandon for hooking up the NYU Law. So NYU Law is going to be our host next month, and that's going to be on the 16th. It's on a Monday. We usually do Tuesday. And we'll have Fabrice Grinda as our one of our featured speakers. So I hope you'll join us there. So, quick reminder, I've been doing a lot of talking, and there's pretty much no one here that comes to hear me talk except for my mom, and my mom's watching the live stream right now, so literally no one came to hear me talk. So let's transition away from that. Take out your phones, take a picture, post it, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the kids are doing nowadays. It doesn't hurt to tweet Cuomo. It helps. As I said, politicians' offices often have TweetDeck on like a dedicated screen. I know that almost none of you probably use Twitter. I don't really use Twitter anymore, but they care about Twitter, so let's let them know and make sure to buy tickets to next month's event. So without further ado, I'd like to give a big round of applause for Kareem Webb.
Hi, everybody.
So Kareem comes to us from Los Angeles, which is awesome. Always great to have people who bring a lot of the knowledge from other states out to New York. And so I know a little bit about you. I've seen some of your videos online, saw you at CannaGather in Los Angeles, but a lot of people in the audience, either they've only seen you in the headlines or they may not know you. So we'd love to have you introduce yourself for everyone.
Yeah, I'm Kareem from LA. No, the way I typically would introduce myself was just saying that I'm a really blessed guy. I'm the son of two amazing people who were raised in South LA, both to single parents. My dad raised by his grandmother, and my mother, her mom. And I think the story of Fourth Movement really originates in their story, and my dad just being at the right place at the right time in the early 70s, getting a job at McDonald's, fresh out of the military, and parlaying that job, just, kicking ass and taking names, doing the right thing consistently at the right company at the right time, becoming a vice president of McDonald's. And then when I was 11 years old, he came in my room and said, son, you could never inherit my job, but one day you might be able to inherit my business. So when I was 11, he bought 2 McDonald's restaurants with stock that he had accumulated and leveraged in order to become an entrepreneur, and I grew up in that business. And so now the family has 16 of them, and my siblings really run that business. My folks are semi-retired, still with us, thank God. And learned a lot about being an entrepreneur, how to treat people, how to, when you're selling, the dollar menu, how to make money after a lot of transactions, time and time again, how to connect with community, so on and so forth. And that experience led me to have other opportunities, become a Buffalo Wild Wings franchisee, which I am, get engaged philanthropically in and around LA in a significant way, and kind of make a name for ourselves. I think for me, the epiphany was me kind of figuring out to stop chasing happiness versus fulfillment. And it was really the moment that I was able to determine that I didn't sell chicken and beer. I really developed young people. And I think I just began to engage even deeper philanthropically, especially around at-risk youth or young people who were born into situations through no fault of their own that can lead to these negative predictive outcomes, and learning how little love it takes to, intervene and to reverse the cycle, and for people to have hope. And we have so many young people in our country, and it's not really a black or a white thing, it's a poor people thing. And we have so many people that are born into situations that would lead them to believe that God doesn't love them. When you can look at your phone and you see everybody else living well, and those opportunities don't seem realistic for you, it's hard for all of us to get up every day dealing with our children, our families, our work, overcoming obstacles. Seems like, the top of this hill is the bottom of the next hill. But just imagine, like some of the folks in this room, but I would beg to say that probably most of the folks in this room were born into situations like mine, with parents with high morals and values and work ethic, which would allow us to be here competing for an opportunity to do well in a new market. And so I just fell in love with the spark that goes in people's eye when you can convince them that they're worthy of whatever they want to create for themselves in their life. And I think that's what led to this kind of social equity opportunity around LA. So I'm really just Kareem from LA, but that was the long version. Yeah.
And then you became Kareem from LA, airport commissioner, and more importantly, or equally importantly, founder and CEO of Fourth Movement. And so what is Fourth Movement?
Yeah, so I mean, Fourth Movement is kind of the culmination of a lot of experiences that I've had, specifically in the restaurant and somewhat in the franchise space. LA, I don't know enough about New York to say definitively, but I know when you're in the Bay Area or I was just recently spending a lot of time in Detroit and was surprised by what I found. We've spent a lot of time in the second half of last year in Illinois, especially in Chicago, surprised by what I found. So in LA, there's 20 million people in our DMA. You have one black-owned gas station for 20 million people. There's no black-owned, African-American-owned hotels. There's no real significant African-American-owned grocery stores. You might have one car dealership of like a major car dealership that's owned by African Americans. So, there's a lot in entertainment, and then we have, some African Americans that do well in corporate America or do well in the professional services, doctors, attorneys. But in terms of entrepreneurship on the ground, being able to employ people, you just don't see African Americans. So I know that maybe if I was in Atlanta and I had 4 Buffalo Wild Wings, it wouldn't mean much, maybe, I don't know. But in LA, especially having a store in Crenshaw or having one in Carson, which is, adjacent to Compton and Watts and all of that, and being engaged philanthropically, wherever there was like African-American politicians or politicians, policymakers that cared about what was happening in South LA, business, philanthropy, we would just show up. So when the city of LA decided that 2/3 of their licenses were going to go to people who were from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the application of criminal justice, basically who had been screwed by the war on drugs, folks reached out to me and said, hey man, we trust the way that you engage in business. We're taking a big bet on this. I hope that you will consider getting into it. And it was something that I did very reluctantly because I was concerned about my family name and my parents' legacy and all of that kind of stuff. And I wasn't, people, when you're an entrepreneur, they're approaching you about, hey, man, I have this grow or I've got this. I'm just like, man, look, man, you know what I mean? I'm in the sports bar business, bro. I'm not investing in your weed scheme or whatever. So, I've always been fascinated about improving outcomes. So like as an entrepreneur, you're always looking at the P&L. You're trying to figure out like, okay, how do I reduce my cost of sales, or how do I reduce labor, or how do I reduce occupancy costs? Because you got to reduce these things while you're trying to grow top line sales in order to produce a result. And when I'm looking at like the progress of African Americans in LA, and I'm saying, okay, well, wait a minute, we've had elected officials that come from our community for a long time, but our health outcomes and our educational attainment outcomes and our household income, the outcomes are not getting better, they're getting worse. So how do we address that? And so when the call came around potentially getting engaged in this issue, I thought, well, this is interesting because this is something in a limited market, there's a finite amount of the opportunity. If you could leverage the opportunity to compete at a very high level, then maybe we have a chance to really improve our outcomes. And I think when we talk about social equity, we gotta be really careful to make sure that we understand what it is that we're saying, what is social equity and what's implied when a policymaker creates policy. So first of all, I think that social equity is people actually being able to exist equitably in our country, right? It's not the license or it's not the opportunity. That could easily become a distressed asset or an asset that somebody got inexpensively that somebody else is going to take advantage of over time. It doesn't matter whether or not somebody got the license if they can't stand up a business that's going to produce the income, right? And then they have the character and fortitude to be able to convert that income into progress in community. That's social equity. And that is the reason by which I would think policymakers would legislate in a way that would disproportionately benefit individuals from communities that have been disproportionately impacted. But we got to make sure that we're not legislating just for people to get opportunity, because that ain't it. We got to make sure that we are beginning with the end in mind in terms of what's actually going to happen, that the people who end up with the licenses are likely to be successful in the process and have the moral fortitude to do what we need to do on behalf of our entire community. I think the other thing that we got to do is I think the other thing that's implied in policy, right? So if you're a policymaker and you create policy and you acknowledge that as a policymaker or as a jurisdiction, as the state of New York or as the city of New York, we have actually hurt people unfairly. Everybody was smoking weed, everybody was using it, and everybody was dealing it. We were stopping and frisking in one part of town, or we were harming people in one part of town disproportionately. We want to reverse that. But what we're saying is that, listen, when we harm people in this part of town, we harmed all of us. We made us all less safe. We made those people in that community less competitive. You know, we harmed all of our collective possibility from an economic perspective because people are less competitive. And so when we reverse the trend, or when we address what we screwed up by giving people more of the opportunity, what we're saying is that it's in the interest of all of us. So just like what I was talking about in terms of the opportunity and who gets the license and who are they and what they have the ability to do, we also have a right to ask who's going to operate in community. And is the individual that's going to operate that dispensary or going to operate that delivery service or going to operate that distribution service going to operate in a way that's consistent with the types of businesses that I want at the end of my block? I think that's fair question to ask too. And I don't know that we're hitting the nail on the head in some of the policies that we've seen up to this point. Certainly we got it messed up in LA, and hopefully we'll get it back together again. Even though we've done pretty well in the process, not as well as we would have liked to do, but there's no way with 100 invoices that will turn into licenses that only 30 of the 100 should have been people of color. That's wrong. So, yeah, ask me another question, Josh. Shit, I'm on a roll.
Well, it's kind of hard because social equity is, and I've shared this with you, social equity is not something that anyone's really figured out. And the reason why I'm so excited to have you with us is Fourth Movement is one of like the few, and when I say one of the few, I mean maybe like Christine with People's Dispensary, like there's like two people who like seem to be onto something, and you guys are like actually onto something. So usually I'm up here like asking questions, but now I'm like in here like taking notes in my head. So it's like I need to stop taking notes and go back to questions. So questions. I have like 5 of them. One is about optics and reputational risk. One is about in community. You talk about that a lot through all of your speeches, and the responsibility, and I'm glad that you mentioned where your restaurants and your venues are, because they're in, you describe them as places that you help bring up, and sort of being in community and helping not just make money from those communities, but actually lifting those communities up.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to give the wrong impression, too, like it's both, right? It's not an either or, it's both and let me just tell you, in mid-30s, being African-American in L.A., you can think it's a liberal bastion, but it took us 21 LOIs to actually get a deal done. So our Jewish broker would go out and get deals done. We'd have an LOI that we think is done, and then we'd go meet the landlord, and our deals would fall apart. It took us a long time.
Are you saying you can't trust the Jews?
No, I'm saying that...
I can't be anti-Semitic, guys. Come on. I'm just kidding.
I'm saying that it wasn't a brown face that was going to go do those deals, and when our brown faces showed up, deals would fall apart time and time and time again. So, and so, yeah, we operate in South LA, but we also operate in Koreatown, and we're building in Chinatown, and we operate in Torrance. And I spend, $250,000 in security costs in my inner city stores that I don't have in my more suburban stores. That's just the reality. It costs more to do business. You make less money generally. On the dispensary side, the name of the dispensary that's associated, or the brand that's associated with Fourth Movement, is called 64 and Hope. And so we've got 13 of these, what the city of LA is calling invoices, which indicate imminent licensure. And we think we'll begin to start opening these stores in May, but none of them are in the inner city, quote unquote. So listen, we've got generations of folks coming from outside of our community, coming into our community, operating liquor stores and other things, taking that bread, going back to their community, beautifying it, and creating the place that they want to live, the way, how they want to live. What we're saying is, no, we're going to partner with people who qualify for these set-aside licenses or social equity licenses. We're going to raise enough capital and attract enough talent to be able to execute against the opportunity, in a way that outshines anybody else. That's the standard. And then we're going to go to Main and Main, where it's the highest average volume and the most traffic, wherever that is in LA. So we're in Brentwood and Santa Monica adjacent, and Beverly Hills adjacent, and like in all of what you would think would be the most high rent areas of the city, getting ready to go to do the most revenue, so that our social equity partners can go back and compete for what's currently happening in and around Leimert Park and View Park and Baldwin Hills and parts of the city where displacement is rampant.
Well, I guess just chronologically, it seems like we're in a second, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like we're in sort of like a second phase of Los Angeles social equity. Like there was sort of a first one, and it was a disaster, and now there's like a second one. Could you give us like a sense of what's going on what's been going on in Los Angeles in social equity context? I
think, listen, when you get to the sausage making and the policy making, you've got people who are well capitalized, and then you got the people you're trying to help, right? And so I think what happened in what they call round 1 of phase 3 of licensing, which is really social equity retail licensing for the city of LA. They decided to issue 100 licenses. You had to have real estate in order to apply. So 800 people went out and got leases, which means that inherently 700 of them were going to be harmed. And that's what happened. We put $5.2 million on the street, and we got 32 leases around the city. and we were successful with 13 of them. So we're in the process of divesting the real estate that we're not licensed for. And then now the city is probably going to go out, but I think would end up being another 100 or 150 licenses. But I think they're going to revamp their entire process, probably a different application process. And maybe it'll happen by the end of the year, maybe not. And then these first 100 folks that got those licenses will be in the process of standing up their businesses. And I think the city will flush that out here in the next month or so.
What are the lessons from what you saw in Los Angeles? And you're also, I think, looking at Illinois, and you mentioned Detroit. Like, what are you seeing from what's been going on around the country with regard to social equity and your recommendations for the lawmakers in New York State?
Well, in LA, I think when you got to be really careful with carve-outs because the people that are asking for those carve-outs are typically in a position to be more competitive in the process. And I say that to say, like in LA, I was saying that only 30 of the 100 are actually people of color, or what I consider to be people of color, black and brown, right? And you've got like a high number of Armenian people who qualify based upon the zip codes that they had lobbied for and had the acumen to get into the system fast and make it happen. But that wasn't the intent of the social equity program. It was for those folks. Those were not the people that were the most harmed by the war on drugs. It just wasn't. But there's a loophole. In Illinois, we just applied, right? So we applied on behalf of 30 people in Illinois. They're only giving out 74 or 75 licenses. And something like 8,000 people applied, or some really big number of 600-page applications. It was nuts. So, what are the chances that
8,000?
It was a big number, okay? And so, what are the chances that the folks that we would hope would benefit from social equity would have been the people that were most likely to navigate the 600-page application process or have the resources necessary to surround themselves with the talent necessary to execute that in a way that they're going to do well in a meritorious process? I don't know. And then there's also a loophole that said you didn't actually have to qualify for social equity in terms of where you had to live as long as you promised to hire a certain number of people. So I mean, one of the funniest stories, we kind of capture most things that we do. So we had a really nice guy, white dude, who was like capturing for us, and he came up to me after the fact, was like, "Yeah, man, I'm a social equity applicant." And I was like, "Wow, that's
It's fucked up."
Yeah, how is that?
I'll say it. That's fucked up.
Yeah, it's because he had committed to hiring a certain number of people who come from these these disadvantaged neighborhoods or whatever. So,
well, I guess,
so we'll see you have to wait and see what happens in Illinois to see actually who gets the opportunity.
So maybe I spoke too soon, but like, what are your thoughts on a situation like that? Like, it seems like the whole premise of social equity is about enfranchising, as you mentioned, the people that were adversely affected by the failed war on drugs, which is not white people, definitively. I mean, obviously there are some people that were affected, but Dana, thank you for your service in this journey. But historically, disproportionately, it was a war of color, and was intended to be so, whether Anslinger admitted it or not. So, like, what are your thoughts around what is equity and?
Well, I told you what I thought. I mean, what I think it is helping people live equitably in our country who otherwise wouldn't, or likely otherwise wouldn't. And so I think the set-asides and the carve-outs you got to be careful for, because they're there for a reason, to allow people to benefit who weren't intended to benefit.
That makes sense. I have a ton of questions, but I don't want to monopolize the time, as I usually do, although I definitely will if no one else has questions. But we have one question right there.
Yeah, sure. I'm betting that if we're, let's say, for example, successful in helping social equity folks in New York, you don't want to smoke cannabis that comes from Georgia or has a Georgia connotation. Prop 64 legalized cannabis in California, so LA Fitness, 64 and Hope, so on and so forth. That That's the bet. And since you were thinking about asking, I'll tell you anyway. Fourth movement, that name came from Dr. King. He talked about if the experience of African Americans in our country was described in the form of a symphony, the first movement would be the abolition of slavery, and the second would be civil rights, and the third would be voting rights. The fourth would be economic equality, and so that's where we get fourth movement from.
I only asked 4 questions in my head and from a template, so before I forget, what are your recommendations for entrepreneurs, both on the social equity side and beyond, and just in general, when it comes to cannabis and cannabis in New York State?
Think big. You know, my thing is to think big. You know, and anticipate what's going to happen when we get federal legalization, which I think will probably happen within the next 2 to 3 years. It takes so long to stand up these businesses. It's so capital intensive. It takes just as much ingenuity, time, effort, and attention to stand up a Subway as it does a Cheesecake Factory or whatever. And so if you can think about scale, that's what's going to allow you to kind of withstand what's going to happen with consolidation, you know, and professionalization at the highest level, you know, as it relates to kind of driving traffic and market share. So think big.
Cool. Questions? Bobby. The question was, you know, you've met with the chamber and the governor directly, like, and they all think highly of you, as I also shared. So everyone likes you, and you have a pretty good sense of, you know, what we might want to do to try to push the ball forward with cannabis legalization and doing it the right way. What are your recommendations for the people in the audience? What should we be doing?
Well, I think what you talked about, you got to be engaged. So if people don't know that you have a perspective, they won't know. I think generally, I mean, for us, you know, Shanita's our partner on the ground, who was formerly the executive director of Minority Cannabis Business Association nationally, and so she knows way more than I do, and she's in Albany and aligning with folks who are on the ground here who are doing the good work. And so we want to continue to advocate for legislation that's consistent with, you know, what we think is in the interest of social equity being successful in New York. And so I think if people can think about how they would engage in from a business perspective and go advocate that and ensure that the policy is set up in a way, because it's happening, and make sure the policy is set up in a way that allows you to do what you're planning to do.
Get involved. And then, so Shanita Penny who was with Fourth Movement, founded the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Definite VIP, should have been on that list. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Shanita. The question was, what should we be asking for when we're advocating?
Yeah, to me, it's, I'll tell you what they did do in LA, what I think that they got right. Notwithstanding, they included some zip codes they shouldn't have included, is they just looked at where the most arrests were. So in other words, the state could go and say, all right, where were all the cannabis arrests in the state of New York? Let's take the census tracts of the top 10% of all the arrests and make those the areas where people, if they lived there for 5 years and can prove that they've lived there for 5 years, eligible for social equity. In Los Angeles, there was also an income requirement. In Illinois, there wasn't. There's cases to be made on both sides. So in LA, you know, we 100% finance. We don't charge for our services and to partner with people, but people have to work hard in our training process, and we train a lot more people than actually get the opportunity. So we met with 700 in LA, trained 120, and then we presented the opportunity to the 32 people we got leases for, and then we applied and we got 13. That's how it works. In Illinois, we met with 300 people. We vetted 300 people, ensured that they qualified for the Illinois Social Equity Program. We trained 60 people for 6 months, and then we chose 30 of the 60 to apply on behalf of. So it's meritorious, and they know that at the very beginning of the process. The difference is in LA, you had to be considered low income. You had to be from these neighborhoods that were disproportionately impacted by arrests. And you couldn't make, in LA, I think it was like more than $44,000 or something around there, right? And you had to have tax returns to be able to prove your income, right? And so in Illinois, there was no income threshold to be below. And what you saw is you saw people with different kinds of jobs and different types of experiences in Illinois who make more than $40,000 than what you saw in LA. And so we'll see how that all plays out once we get licensed and, you have a test case because you're going to have two different populations.
Are you optimistic about Illinois? I mean, I know that they staggered the social equity to May 1st, is it? That you guys...
I think the cannabis industry is an exercise of spirituality. It's like you have you're attached to nothing. You just go out there, put your best foot forward, and let the chips fall where they may. So, yeah, the better question, Josh, would have been like, how do you feel like your team came together, and what was the quality of your applications, the quality of the training, the quality of the individual, if they're successful and you stand up businesses, will you be proud of it, and will those businesses operate in the best interest of the people of Chicago and the surrounding areas? Without a doubt. Will we get licensed? I don't know. Yeah.
Can I ask a simple question?
Dana wants to ask a question.
How about just giving a cash payout to everyone who is incarcerated? That would definitely hit the people.
Dana wants to know if he can get money from the government for...
Instead of like trying to give it to some people who didn't really go to prison.
Yeah, I mean...
How about giving it to the people who went to prison? They were hurt.
I get that, and I don't think it has to be an either or, but I think that social equity is about, I think you give money to people and they do what with the money. So it's not about, to me, we're talking about improving communities, right? And those along a business, in my own personal experience, a business and a business owner, and let me start over. Here's what I know. I know that we have engaged and trained individuals who have become the best version of themselves because the carrot of owning a business and being the matriarch or patriarch of their family in a way that never would have otherwise happened changes behavior. And it's the behavior that's associated with being disenfranchised with our country that harms us all. So giving somebody a check, I mean, everybody's cool with some bread, but that's so temporary. It's the carrot and the repeated and the, I'm not disagreeing with you, sir, and I'm not saying that your solution is not viable as a way to repair harm for people who were unfairly sent to prison or arrested around cannabis. I'm not. What I'm talking about is cannabis policy as it relates to licenses that are finite, and how we ought to regulate those licenses, who ought to get them, and what we ought to be making the criteria be for who gets them, so that we can have the most impact long term that impacts those communities the most, and as a result, benefits all of us. Yeah.
Right there. Question was, what is the role of universities and education overall in cannabis?
I think we're going to find out more and more. Obviously, like even in the HBCUs, there's a lot going on with respect to hemp and the ag business. I think you're seeing that in universities around the country. I think Stanford is doing a lot with respect to cannabis and cannabis entrepreneurship. So I think more and more of that is going to come. Listen, all of us that are in business in the space understand it's business. That's why there's lawyers here. It's why there's accountants here. It's just business. I'm not a cultivator. I'm not a manufacturer, and about to be a distributor, but I'm not really a distributor either. I'm a retail operator. So I know that business well, and I could tell you, being in cannabis, there are very small amount of intricate differences. It's all the same principles that I employ in Buffalo Wild Wings that are going to make us successful in terms of technology, customer information, speed of service, cleanliness, scheduling, managing the P&L, leveraging analytics in order to deliver the best customer experience, and then being in front of them right when they need it, solving for delivery, all of those kinds of things. I could be talking about dry cleaning or hamburgers or Buffalo Wild Wings or weed, right? So I think education matters, and an educated person is going to be able to apply their expertise in this space. Now, I'm ignorant when it comes to growing the plant, so let me just put that out there as a caveat.
Question was, is there any consideration from Fourth Movement to get involved in testing labs?
Yeah, because we don't cultivate and we don't manufacture, we don't have to necessarily be engaged directly with the testing labs because we don't have product to test. But that said, what we do have is we have a plethora of worthy people who have gone through our social equity training process, who we are in the process of trying to find other opportunities for. So like, for instance, if you were to have a testing lab here in New York, and if we were to come here and adult use passed, and we were competing to help people be successful in the space, and we trained a number of folks, we wouldn't help, all those folks wouldn't apply or wouldn't be successful in the process. And you might say, there might be social equity licensing around testing. You might have a model that works, and we might help some folks be successful aligned with you.
Sanford's question is
here's my answer. So the question was, he doesn't feel like, sir, your name is Sanford. Thanks for the question. Doesn't feel like social equity is out there enough. You're not hearing it, right? Or the people, your peers aren't hearing it. That's one of the things about cannabis coming out of the unformalized market into the formal market, is models like Fourth Movement and others that are out there. People are going to hear about it. We're going to make a lot of noise, but we got to get open. And Fourth Movement, what we're about is social equity. We're not a cannabis company first. We're a social equity business first. And as soon as we begin to start getting open here, we'll be doing non-cannabis related retail using the same exact model, because this is transformative and it does have the ability to create some more equitable existences and address income inequality in our country, leveraging what is quintessentially American, which is capitalism, right? And so that's what we're going to go do. And I think, right now we haven't seen very many social equity businesses open. There are none open in Illinois. There are none open in LA. There are a few open in San Francisco and Oakland, but we don't have street sides. You've got some deliveries and some manufacturing establishments that exist, but nothing that's making a lot of noise. Certainly nothing with multiple units and scale and documentaries or whatever that you can hear about. That's all going to change over the next year.
The question was, how do you reconcile the sort of existing folks who have been adversely affected by the failed war on drugs and their current incarceration, both Fourth Movement, you as in Fourth Movement and the social equity movement more broadly, with the fact that these people still are incarcerated and dealing with some of the byproducts of that?
I think the pressure is mounting and that it's coming. So like Jackie Lacey is running again for a DA in the city of LA. Just got announced yesterday, 66,000 expungements, right? So, and she did that because the guy Rendon that she's running against is coming from San Francisco, and he'd already done it in San Francisco. So what you're seeing is, I think as adult use rolls out and there's more commerce conversation, and there's more pressure to address the criminal justice, the current criminal justice circumstances of individuals as it relates to cannabis. And there are a lot of people and organizations that we're aligned with who do that work and are experts at it. Mike De La Rocha is one of our advisors, Schools Not Prisons, and all the work that he and John Legend are doing around just this exact issue. we're totally aligned. One of the things that I will acknowledge is that what all of us in this space are doing, certainly what we're doing, is hard. You know, you got to raise capital, and capital is not ubiquitous in this space in that it's still federally legal. And so you typically have teams that are relatively small doing a lot more work than would typically be necessary in other startup environments in order to accomplish what you got to accomplish and then still be successful when you get open, and it's cumbersome. And it doesn't give us the bandwidth to do everything that we'd like to do from a community perspective, as well as training the individuals, many of which have cannabis convictions, right? Or who are, you know, we don't ask that question. We find out in the storytelling as we're getting people's stories, and everybody in LA and everybody in Illinois that qualified and that went through our program have extensive stories and histories interacting with the war on drugs. Children that have been to prison, you know, themselves, their husbands, et cetera, et cetera. So I acknowledge you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and we are cousins in the same fight, for sure.
There's one round of applause, yeah. One last question, and I mentioned it to you previously by email, and I think it was touched on in these last two questions. You have the education side, the CJR side. We talked a lot about the sort of licensing and what it takes to run a business in the context of social equity, but what does social equity mean to you beyond that in terms of, as we were talking about, in terms of being in community and helping these communities grow? If New York State passes legalization, if there is an earmark for social equity, part of that is going to go towards the license structure, and then a lot of that is sort of nebulous at this point. What does that sort of universe non-exhaustively mean to you?
I'm confused as hell, Josh. I don't know what that. No.
Fair. Beyond licenses, what does social equity mean to you, and what should the state use that money and that windfall for in terms of quote-unquote social equity, if anything, maybe nothing?
Well, I think, you know, beyond licensing, like I said, the licenses are the key, you know, but it's not the car. You know, the car got to run down the road. We got to get somewhere. If you ain't got the key, you can't go anywhere. You need the key, but we got to actually go somewhere. And we will not legislate it right if we don't have the right mindset about what we're trying to accomplish. And what we've seen too many times is that the legislation is about getting, you know, getting somebody a license. And the license is if you have a key and your car don't work, you don't know how to drive, it doesn't matter. You ain't got gas in the car, it will not matter. Somebody's gonna come get that key that knows how to drive, fix up a car, and it's not gonna be the person that you wanted to help. All right, so.
Cool. Kareem Webb, founder and CEO of Fourth Movement, the leading social equity platform. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much.